Hi, I'm Kent. Today we're going to talk about two blechnums, both of them what we would call tree ferns. We have Blechnum gibbum. This particular variety is Silver Lady. And we have Blechnum Braziliensis. Obviously they're related, but they're different in the color of the emerging fronds. Blechnum gibbum grows up as a tree fern. You can see on the bottom that we have a stalk starting to form as the new fronds are developed. The dark lines on the back of the fronds are actually indusia, which are the structures that spore come from. So these dark lines on the bottom are not a disease or anything like that. It's simply the reproductive structure of this particular fern. Blechnums are dimorphic, which means they have different fronds depending on whether it is a sterile frond without spore or a fertile frond with spore. And you can see two examples of this right here. You can see that this frond is sterile. It does not have any spore on the back of it. And because it's dimorphic, the sterile frond in this case, the pinnae are fairly wide, as opposed to the fertile frond right next to it, where we have the spore on the back and the pinnae are much narrower. Like any fern, the fronds unfurl from the crown. You can see we have a nice example of a frond that's unfurling up here at the top. This is the maximum width that you're actually going to see from this fern. The fronds may sit down a little bit flatter in your environment as opposed to being quite so upright, but it's going to be this kind of mass on the top of whatever stalk you end up with as this gets older. And I've seen these growing up 3 or 4 feet. As it gets older, the stalk gets longer, of course, but the head on the top really doesn't get much larger than this. This is a nice plant for indoors if you have the room for it when it gets this large. When it's smaller in a 4-inch pot or 6-inch pot, it is only going to be 10 inches, maybe a foot across, and is very, very manageable. This sort of plant, when it gets this large, needs a little bit more space than some of the other ferns that we have. If you look at the Brazilian tree, you can see that the new fronds are actually very, very nicely colored. And this is a function of light. If you have it in dim light, you tend to get a little bit more brown. If you have it in bright light, you tend to get a little bit more red. And I have seen this with just absolutely bright red fronds. This plant, while dimorphic, does not have as much of a difference in fertile fronds versus sterile fronds. The fronds that you see here are almost all fertile. If I tilt it up, these are all fertile, as you can see. This particular frond is sterile, and while there's not a lot of a difference, you can see that the pinnae on the sterile frond are a little bit closer together, and the frond appears just a little bit fuller. This particular plant also will grow up on a stalk, just like its cousin, the Blechnum gibbum. And you can see down here that it does in fact have a stalk that's just starting to form. It also needs a little more room than the normal ferns that we sell. It will not get any wider than this, but as the trunk forms, the trunk will get higher and higher. This in a 4-inch pot or a 6-inch pot may have a span of a foot maximum, maybe will have a span of a foot maximum and be much more suited for table or something like that. But you will still end up with these very, very nicely colored new fronds. The fronds do fade as they get older into a green. This red color only occurs as they're starting to unfurl. I'd like to leave you now. This is Kent Kratz, Casa Flora.